kitchen. This is where my passion lies. This is where I feel most comfortable, right here in the kitchen. So I'm excited to be bringing this to you today. Today we're going to talk about the foundations of what we need to make good cake pops, and that all starts with our cake pop dough. The rich chocolate cake recipe, follow it along. I'm going to walk right through the steps of how to create this chocolate cake that I use all the time for my cake pops. So I've got the oven preheated behind me. It's ready to go, and we're just going to jump right in. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the cake dough. This recipe is my rich chocolate cake. It can be done just like this and eaten for cupcakes and regular cake, and you can use it for cake pops because it's definitely rich and it's definitely moist and fudgy. So let me first of all talk about cakes and density of cakes. When we are doing cupcakes or say an 8-inch tiered cake or whatever, it's okay to have all that nice aerated cakes. You absolutely can use them. They taste wonderful. They're great. When we're working with cake pops and we're working specifically with character-based cake pops where we're molding that cake pop dough, I'm looking for a very dense cake that will hold its shape, almost a fudge consistency. So that's what this recipe is, and I will tell you why, and I'll show you the key that will actually change from a nice cupcake recipe to a beautiful cake pop recipe. And you can use this across the board with any recipe that you want. You just need to know how to alter it appropriately. So the first thing we got to do, I've got the oven at 350 degrees. I am getting ready. I just have a regular 9x13 cake pan. I'm going to use a little pan. Since I'm using this for a cake pop dough, I'm just going to spray it with Pam just so it's easy enough to come out of the pan because it's not going to stay in here anyway. So let me just hold it over my sink. I'm just going to spray it. Just a light coat. I mean, just simply just a light coat. And then I'm going to put it over here on my stovetop until I'm ready to use it. So I'm going to mix all of my dry ingredients together first. And I'm going to just go ahead and sift it. So over here, I'm going to go right down through the recipe. If you're following along, it calls for 1 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour. So I have my all-purpose flour. I went ahead and measured out most of the ingredients just for time's sake. To my flour, I'm just going to add my cocoa powder. Now, this recipe originally called for 3/4 cup of cocoa powder. However, I split it up and made 1/2 cup of your regular cocoa powder, Dutch processed cocoa powder, and 1/4 cup of the special dark one. And that just gives this cake a rich, magic chocolate flavor. It just really enhances that chocolate. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. I'm going to throw my sugar in. It's been a little moist, damp. The humidity's been high lately, so I want to make sure that there's no particles that are too big, it leaves clumps in there. Also going to put my baking soda, my baking powder, and my salt all in here. I'm just going to put all of my dry ingredients together in one bowl. I'm going to sift it to make sure. Oh, and I use sea salt. You can use whatever salt you like, but I like that sea salt in chocolate. So, and then I'm just going to push it down through, make sure that everything is not lumpy. Now, most of all this stuff will go down through, except for the sea salt that has some larger pieces, and that's okay. I'm just more or less looking for the flour to go through, and also the baking soda or baking powder, whichever one. There's a big clump right there. We just want to make sure that that is all sifted through there. And there's all my sea salt that's nice and big, and we're just going to make sure everything goes through except for that, and then I'm going to just dump it in. Okay, so I just want to make sure that it's all nice and mixed up. Let's get a little whisk here, and I just want to mix it in my bowl. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just want to make sure that it's all mixed up together. So I'm not really seeing a whole lot of the white. I want to see more of the chocolate colored. All right. So here's my dry ingredients. I'm gonna sit them aside, and now I'm gonna take my mixing bowl, and you can do this the other way around too. You can put your dry ingredients in your mixing bowl and then add your wet on top of it, or you can do the wet and then add your dry ingredients. But the key is to actually make sure that you're doing all the dry together and all the wet together. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with my eggs. I'm gonna crack my eggs in here. There's one, there's two. My whisk, I just wanna break up those eggs a little bit.
Not yet.
Okay. All right. To my eggs, I'm gonna add some vegetable oil. So I'm gonna use half a cup of vegetable oil. And here begins the discussion of cake pops. Out in our cake pop world, we are kind of divided, if you will. Do you add the fats? Do you add the oils, or don't you? It is your call. There's a lot of people that do not add the oil. The reason being is if you add the oils or your butter, some recipes call for butter instead, or shortening, when you make your cake and then you make cake pop dough out of it, those oils will leach onto your paper lollipop stick, and it causes your lollipop stick to become yellow. And a lot of people have decided that in order to get rid of the yellow lollipop stick from the oils leaching, they just remove that oil from their cake pop dough. And that's okay. You can absolutely do that. And it doesn't change necessarily the flavor of your cake by removing that oil. But what it does do is remove some of the moisture in it. But I just think I have taken a long time to master my cake recipes so that they taste amazing and they're moist and they're delicious, that I'm gonna leave every single ingredient in my cake recipe, but I'm gonna alter what I do for my lollipop stick. I create a barrier between what my cake is touching and what my stick is touching. I just dip it, I just make an extra step, and I dip my lollipop stick in chocolate and I let it set up and dry. So now here's my cake dough, here's my paper lollipop stick, and now it's got this chocolate that acts like a waterproof barrier between the two. So for me, I will keep every single ingredient in my recipe because I want that flavor, I want that texture, I want the moisture content in my cake. But I will add one extra little tiny step that just takes me a little bit longer, dipping my lollipop stick and letting it harden before I actually put the cake pop on. And that solves the problem. So you do whatever works for you. If you want to take out the oils or the fat content in your recipe, you absolutely can. That's not what I do. I leave it in there. So for this recipe, it calls for half a cup of oil, and so I'm leaving it in there. So we have oil in our bowl. We have eggs in our bowl. I'm going to pour some vanilla in there. I never measure my vanilla. It says 2 teaspoons, but yep, that's about right. So the next thing I'm going to need is some buttermilk. Now, I don't buy buttermilk. I make my buttermilk. So in order to make it, I take 1 cup. It actually calls for a cup of milk or buttermilk. You can, if you don't have buttermilk, you can use regular milk. That's okay. But I'm going to use buttermilk, and I don't want oil. I'm going to use apple cider vinegar. Apple cider vinegar in milk will create buttermilk. All we're doing is trying to curdle the milk. So usually it's about 2 to 3 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. I put that in the bottom of a 1 cup measuring cup, and then I fill the rest of it up with milk. And it'll curdle within just a few minutes. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to swish it around in my cup. Actually, here's a spoon. I'll just use it. And I'm just going to let it sit there until I do the rest of the recipe. And it'll turn to buttermilk. All right, and then to this, I am going to add my coffee. All right, so here we have coffee. My coffee pot's on the other side of the room, so I went ahead and put it in a thermos to keep it nice and hot. So I'm going to add 1 full cup. This is a ½ cup measuring cup. I'm going to pour it in here with my eggs and my oil. That didn't pour very well out of a cup, Jack. Remind me not to do that one again. All right, so here we go. We've got liquids in one. Just going to give that a nice little stir. The other thing that I can tell you, whenever you're making cake pop dough, you don't want to beat this stuff completely so it's so aerated. We just want to mix it just until the ingredients are wet. So I'm going to put it on a stand mixer here. Actually, let me dump this in so I don't really make a mess. I'm going to add my dry ingredients to my wet. And I can get rid of that pan out of here. I'm going to use my whisk attachment. You can use a hand mixer if you want. We just want it on low just to barely mix it. And then we're going to turn it up to medium for about a minute or a minute and a half. So this might get a little loud. So I'm just mixing the dry ingredients with the wet ingredients. By the time this mixes up really nicely, I'll drop the pan, I will scrape the bowl, and then I will add my buttermilk because it's thickening up really nicely right now. Most of my ingredients are now all mixed. I just want to scrape that bowl a little bit. All right, so everything's all wet. I'm going to add my buttermilk that's now curdled. And I also, well, let me do this first. I'll show you real quick. I'm going to mix this in. Now this, at this point, we could cook it. It would make beautiful cupcakes or a cake if you wanted to do that. But what I want to do is create that denseness in this cake. Oh, I missed an ingredient, guys. It's my espresso powder. We're going to give it a 1-2 punch, this chocolate here. I was just thinking, why? What am I missing? All right. Okay, so I'm going to put that in there before it mixes up much more. I get sidetracked when I'm trying to teach and make at the same time. I do apologize. One of these days, I'll be a professional. You guys that are in my Just Less Creations group and doing the live tutorials, I really appreciate the grace that you guys give me on my life. When I'm doing these tutorials. All right, so now I'm going to mix this up just until it's thoroughly mixed. When we add that liquid, it's going to make it a little bit on the thin side. That's okay. It's all right. We don't mind that at all. All right. Now this time I'm going to drop it and I'm going to scrape the sides with my spatula just to make sure that all that liquid gets mixed up and emulsified together. All right, now I'm going to turn it up and I'm just going to let it blend at medium for about a minute, and that's it. Just to make sure the emulsification is there. So normally in my recipes to make it dense, I'm going to add something that causes thickness. So you can, if I had pastry cream, I would add pastry cream. If I had sour cream, I would add sour cream. Just a little bit. It just really helps that denseness, create that denseness in the cake that I'm looking for, that the end result is more like fudge. So I went into the refrigerator to find sour cream, and only to find that my husband used my container of sour cream to make French onion dip the other day. So this was like, what, 30 minutes before we were going live. So I thought, what else can I do to make this cake dense? So what I did was I found his Chobani, what is it, the black cherry yogurt, which still is going to have that same, you're talking milk product, you're talking the enzymes in there, has like the vinegar, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to take this little cup, and we're going to take our chocolate cake and we're going to make it into a Black Forest cake. Black Forest is black cherries and chocolate. So we're just going to do that. I'm just going to take his Chobani yogurt and I'm going to throw it in there. That'll be the substitute on the recipe. It calls for 1/4 to 1/2 cup of sour cream, well, we're just going to use his Chobani yogurt, Greek yogurt in there instead. And I am just right here on the fly 30 minutes ago decided that we're going to alter the recipe just for you guys. So here we go. We're going to make the Black Forest cake, which really is just a chocolate cake, has black cherry filling, which we'll do when it comes out of the oven. So I'm just kind of adding a little bit of taste of that black cherry in to my cake by adding the yogurt in there. Now, if I don't have it on hand, but if I would have had it on hand instead of the vanilla that put in there, I would have put a black cherry extract, or I would have used a black cherry liqueur. So I would have pulled that vanilla out and used that as a substitute to really give that punch of that black cherry flavor. Does that make sense, guys? You can mix and match recipes or create your own, and it's a one of a kind, and you can say that this recipe now is another iteration of the recipe that I have now created, because I've taken a base recipe that works and I've just changed it a little bit, and now it again becomes my own. So this is my own recipe. So let me mix this real quick and we'll get it in the oven to cook. Let's go ahead and get this in the oven. As you can see, it's a little on the thin side, but that's okay. It's not going to hurt anything. It's actually going to, it smells amazing. All right, let me put this in the oven. All right, I'm going to grab my timer here. I'm going to set a timer on my phone, and I'm going to set it for 35 minutes. Don't need that one. 35 minutes. We're going to let it go. We'll test it then. When the cake comes out of the oven, I'm going to throw some foil over top of it, and I'm going to let it sit for 10 minutes, or between 5 and 10 minutes. I want to capture that steam coming out of the cake so that it just kind of really adds that moisture in the cake. And the moisture will also help with that fudge consistency. But another thing that I want to do, because I added that yogurt, that black cherry yogurt in there, and I want it to be more of a Black Forest cake, I'm going to also, before I put that foil on, I have right here some of last year's black cherry pie filling. Well, it's a black cherry puree. I literally just picked black cherries. I pulled the seeds out of them, popped them in a jar with a little bit of water and a little bit of sugar, and I canned them. And so now I have this half jar. I pulled some out to make a pie the other day and used it as my filling. So I still have a little less than half a jar. I'm actually going to take it and I'm just going to spread it over the top of my cake while it's still warm and allow that to just seep into the cake while it's hot. You can do this for any cake, for any any flavor that you want. You can use strawberries. You can just chop up strawberries and puree them and put them over top of your cake. And that acts as a binder as well. So I'm gonna pour this out because it was in the back of the refrigerator and it had some little bit of ice in it. So I wanna make sure it's thawed before I put it on the cake. So while that cake's in the oven, I'm just gonna pour that out. It looks like it's pretty much thawed. Just pour it all in there and we'll use it on top of the cake. All right, let me real quick check my cake and make sure that it's not burning now since I talked. Ah, it's beautiful, beautiful. No more jiggle. It bounces back. And another way to tell that if it's done, you can use the toothpick method, but I don't need to, because if I'm looking at the edge, around the edge of the cake, you know when it's done, when it's not jiggling, doesn't jiggle, and it's also starting to pull away from the side of the pan. I'm going to take the last of my black cherry and I'm just going to spread it across the top. I just want it to soak down in on that nice hot. It's no different than if you work with cakes right now and you put a simple syrup between your layers. It's no different than that concept. I am just adding fruit instead of sugar water or an apricot. Some people use like apricot, like a jelly. I'm just adding fresh fruit, right hot out of the oven. Just smeared on. I don't have any in this corner. So now I have a Black Forest cake. So I've added probably the equivalent of a cup and a half right there. And I still have some in my bowl. Then I'm just going to take my foil and I'm going to cover it right out of the oven. Don't burn yourself. All right, at this point, I'm just going to let it sit here for probably 5 to 10 minutes. This is what I do. I take it out of the foil. It's nice and steaming. Now, see all that nice moisture in there? It's beautiful because now I don't have to worry about using a binder. It's going to turn out more like a fudge. I'm just going to take the whole thing and I'm just going to throw it in my KitchenAid. Jack, you can just go ahead and put the view down here. It's steaming. Whatever you do, don't burn yourself when you're doing this. Alright, I'm just going to put this on my KitchenAid and I'm just going to blend it. I'm just going to turn it on and I'm just going to let it come together. I'm going to do it slowly at first so it doesn't go flying everywhere. And it's going to look like a clump of mud in there. You're going to turn it up. Okay, that's it. Let's pull this back out of the way. I'm just going to get some regular saran wrap. It's hot. All right, we'll just clean off the beater a little bit. Alrighty. Now I'm just going to put the whole thing here in the saran wrap. Oh, yum. That tastes good. All right. So I'm just actually going to roll that up nice and tight, lock in all that heat, lock in all that moisture like this. Voila. And my cake pop dough is done. Now that puppy is warm still, but I'm just going to let that sit for at least 8 hours to overnight right on the counter just like this. And when I'm ready to open it up to make cake pops, it'll be like fudge because there's plenty of moisture in there. I will not need another single thing in it. I can make it just like this.